Okay, and now it's time for our weekend recap. First up is the fight between up-and-comer Josh Kelly and experienced veteran Ray Robinson. And there were many elements about this fight that I was right about, but one that I was wrong about. So let's talk about those elements. You know, I figured this is not going to be an aesthetically pleasing fight to watch because on one end, you've got a bouncy in-and-out green fighter, and on the other end, you've got a seasoned vet who primarily bears the characteristics of a pure boxer. That this is not normally the guy who goes out there and tries to impose his will on the other guy. So in that way, I didn't figure that the aesthetic of this fight was going to be appealing, and it appears that I was right.
Not a fun fight to watch.
Yet another thing I was right about was, given the aesthetic and characteristics of both of these fighters, it's highly probable it goes to the cards, and when it does, it's either going to be a draw or maybe Josh pulls out a win, but it'll be an ugly win. But one way or another, Josh is not going to look good in this fight, and I was right about that as well. Josh Kelly, he's highly touted, he's highly thought of.
He's a former Olympian.
But all those anecdotes aside, if you were to have viewed this fight and judged him based on this fight, you'd likely be wondering what all the fuss is about. So let's talk about what we saw in this thing. I mentioned how Ray Robinson, usually, more often than not, he bears all the characteristics of a pure boxer. Back foot guy, lateral movement guy, pot shot guy, economic guy. Yet in this fight, he was actually the one coming forward and trying to impose his will. If there was anything that surprised me about this fight, it was that Ray Robinson, he spent more time on his front foot than Josh Kelly did, that he wasn't laying off, that he was actually going out there and trying to make a fight of it. But why? Why is it that a guy who normally bears the characteristics of a pure boxer all of a sudden started applying pressure? And I'll tell you why. It's because Josh Kelly's not a jabber. He didn't establish his range, establish his distance relative to that of his opponent by employing the jab. Josh Kelly's a guy who fights with his hands down. Very flashy guy. Reminiscent of your Naseem Ahmed, your Roy Jones Jr. Flash and pizzazz kind of guy.
Ow!
Flash and pizzazz kind of guy with an unconventional methodology. But his unconventional methodology, the fact that he's not more of a textbook kind of boxer, employing a jab to establish distance, establish range, control the tempo and the pace of the fight, the fact that he's not that kind of guy, it opens the door for what is otherwise
defense guy,
economic and cautious kind of fighter to become confident, to become aggressive. Because as that fighter is coming forward, he's not being met with a jab. He's not being met with a jab to deter him from coming forward. A jab to establish distance between Josh and Ray. A jab can be multi-purpose for any variety of reasons. It can be used as a key to key a fighter's way into range and land other punches, start following up with combinations, but just as well, against an advancing opponent, a jab can be used as a deterrent, a defensive tool to keep space between you and that other guy so that he doesn't get overconfident, because as he takes a step forward, he gets popped in the face with a jab. You're not giving the guy anything to look out for.
You're not jabbing.
If as he's coming forward, you're just angling your head and angling your upper body away from the guy as opposed to shooting that jab. Shooting that jab to keep that guy off of you. That if you're not jabbing this guy, you're not jabbing at this guy, there's very little stopping him from closing the gap on you and trying to impose his will on you. And this is how you can explain why an otherwise defensive fighter like Ray Robinson all of a sudden gets froggy with Josh Kelly. Josh Kelly, who did show athletic and defensive virtues by way of head movement, upper body movement, slipping and rolling punches. But in the realm of ring generalship, I'd have to say that most of the time, it was actually Ray Robinson who was the ring general. You see, Josh was looking to work off the counter, and there's a trade-off. That in and of itself is a trade-off, because if you're looking to work off the counter, then you're allowing the other guy to set the pace of the fight. You're working off what he's doing, but in that way, you're letting him initiate the action, which will give the judges the appearance that, you're not doing too much out there. Whatever you're doing is as a result of what he's doing, because he's dictating the pace and he's dictating the action. I tell you the truth that this was not a good showing for Josh Kelly, and I do agree with the judge's decision. I don't think either of these guys won this fight. I think they were right to score it a majority draw, and this is more or less one of the things I touched on in my prediction video, that given the aesthetic of the fight and how it might end up looking, this thing might end up a draw. It might end up a draw, and Josh, he might go out there, he might look like shit, and in some ways he did. So, I think, when they go into their next fight, they go into their next camp, there's going to be some things they need to be mindful of. That Josh might need to dial it down a bit when it comes to the showmanship and add some textbook fundamentals to his repertoire, because he's not going to get far without a jab that he could have used against Ray Robinson. We then come to Callum Smith's super middleweight title fight against challenger Hassan Ndam, who, let's be honest, nobody really gave a chance to win this fight. Thus, the outcome was very predictable. You won't get cool points for this one. Callum Smith was simply too big, too strong, and too much to deal with for Hassan Ndam, who has been put down many times by lesser fighters than Callum Mundo Smith. Thus, the fight ending as abruptly as it did really won't leave you with much to reflect upon, because it's everything you expected. And this opponent doesn't pose the kind of resistance to Callum Smith, or didn't, that would make you sit back and take stock of what level Callum Smith is competing in. It read very much like a showcase fight, an easy KO, and that's really what it was. We then come to Katie Taylor's controversial win against WBC lightweight champion Delphine Persoon. And this is one of last night's fights that really had people talking. I mean, immediately after, you could see it already. There were many people out there who felt that Delphine Persoon had done more than enough to have won the fight, constantly coming forward, unrelenting pressure, more pressure than Katie Taylor has ever had to deal with as a professional, from a higher tier, a higher grade of fighter than anybody she's fought so far. You've got to realize something. The lightweight division has gone on ununified for as long as it has, for a reason. And that reason is nobody was ever in any kind of hurry to fight Delphine Persoon.
Nobody.
And you guys found out why last night. That even Katie Taylor would struggle at her hands. But the question is, did the judges get it right? Were they right to give it to Katie Taylor? Myself, I'll be completely honest that I didn't feel Katie won that fight. When I looked down on my scorecard, what I had was a draw. A draw with Delphine Persoon picking up the final round. The final round where Katie Taylor is all but spent. You can see she's visibly gassed. Her punches are not having any effect, and she's on the receiving end of some hard shots from Delphine Persoon. This was a fight that proved to be far more difficult for Katie Taylor than even I expected. I mean, there were certain components about the fight that I was right about. That Katie Taylor was going to go out there, she was going to try to make a statement, she was going to try to fight fire with fire. But in doing so, at least in the first quarter of the fight, she realized that it's just not a good idea. I had Katie Taylor winning the first round, but the subsequent 2 rounds easily went to Delphine Persoon, who proved not only can she continue to apply that same pressure at that same pace throughout the duration of the fight, but she can take Katie Taylor's best shots and keep coming forward. And I think that that's what most affects people's perceptions of the fight. That even in rounds that Katie Taylor is winning, even in the rounds that she managed to pick up by eventually timing Delphine Persoon as she's coming forward, stringing together combinations and bouncing out of range, that even in rounds where Katie Taylor opted to box more and punch less, Delphine Persoon never took her foot off the gas. She never stopped coming forward. Nothing Katie Taylor did throughout any round, throughout the duration of this fight, ever discouraged Delphine Persoon. And it's for this reason that most people walked away from that fight feeling like Delphine had won. Now, I don't know how you guys scored this thing round by round, and I'm going to have to give it another look to see if I score it the same way. But I reiterate, as the fight was going on, round by round, by the end of the 10th, I had it a draw.
With Delphine finishing strong in the 10th.
With Delphine Persoon picking up the 10th and final round. I think that Katie Taylor managed to win certain of the middle rounds by showing the better boxing of the two, because in spite of Delphine Persoon's constant aggression, she was on the receiving end of a lot of clean shots. And perception is a bitch. You see her getting pieced up, but you also see that it's not having an effect.
She's still in the fight.
So it gives you the perception that she's not losing this fight, even though at the end of the day, scoring blows are scoring blows. Whether you take a good punch or you don't take a good punch, if the punch connected, it's a scoring blow. And Katie Taylor, she managed to land quite a few scoring blows here and there. She picked up several of the mid-rounds, with Delphine Persoon finishing strong in the last round. And that's what most affects people's perception of the fight, that when they think of the fight, they're going to think of the last moments in the fight. And in those last moments, Katie Taylor looked all but spent. She looked like she was ready to go. I mean, she slipped. I think it was either in round 9 or round 8. You could see this girl's tired. She's got nothing left. That this is an unrelenting pace that she is not accustomed to dealing with. So I can understand that some people might have walked away from that fight feeling like Delphine Persoon should have got the decision, but myself, I had it a draw. And I think that for the future of Katie Taylor and her public relations, with what are her fans, the perception that she's one of the best fighters in the world, she has some serious unfinished business with Delphine Persoon, and she owes her a rematch. That it's never going to stop haunting her if she doesn't give Delphine Persoon the rematch that she deserves, because myself, I cannot wholeheartedly say that Katie Taylor won that fight. I mean, the fight itself was a barn burner. It was a fan-friendly fight. It was a competitive fight. Both world champions putting everything they got on the line, putting it all out there, They did a fantastic job entertaining the paying public. But at the end of the day, if we're going to talk brass tacks, no, I really don't feel that Katie Taylor won that fight. And as controversial as it might seem, Katie Taylor is now the undisputed lightweight champion. She is in possession of the 4 major world titles in that weight class. So with that, she does advance on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list. But remember, my opinion and how the list operates are 2 very different things. I don't feel Katie won that fight. I feel it's a draw. That's what I feel. That's my opinion. But that's not what they scored it. They scored it in favor of Katie Taylor, so she reaps the benefit of that, and it is reflected on the list. And finally, what was the most shocking fight of the night, the most shocking fight of the month, of the year, and perhaps of the decade.
And the era.
One of the most monumental upsets the world has seen in the sport of boxing in a very long time. What was supposed to be a very successful U.S. debut for the UK's Golden Boy
Ambassador
turned out to be a horrific sight for the paying public that came all the way to America to support him. We're talking about Anthony Joshua's fight against Andy Ruiz. So let's get right down to brass tacks. What lost Anthony Joshua this fight? Because there's so much ground to cover in regards to the fight itself, the potential ramifications, and what could happen in the future. Now, I'm not going to make any bones about this thing, because integrity dictates that we keep it real with ourselves. I didn't pick Andy Ruiz to win this fight.
Did you?
At minimum, I thought he might hold his own in the early rounds. But this is not a fight that I imagined Andy Ruiz would win.
Did you?
And that in and of itself sparks a lot of conversations, because there are a lot of people out there, they're gloating, they're having fun with it, as if they picked that guy to win. The one thing I will say,
Many times.
that I cautioned in several videos in the past, is that in a division where a knockout is always one punch away, you really can't afford to marinate fights. Anything can happen in the sport of boxing, and nothing characterizes that better than last night's big upset. Now, what caused the upset? Anthony Joshua actually had his man in trouble. He landed a devastating shot. Andy Ruiz looked to be in a bit of trouble there, and rather than
Boxing smart.
following up with straight punches from the outside, where Anthony Joshua and his chin would be out of harm's way, he chose to dive into the trenches and go for the kill, making him subject to Andy Ruiz's quick counters and powerful shots. You gotta realize, Anthony Joshua's got a height advantage on this guy, a reach advantage on this guy. He's got all the tools he needs to box comfortably from the outside, but he chose not to do that. That when he got his man in trouble, rather than continuing to box safely, box smart from the outside, he chose to dive right into the trenches with that guy, and he found out that he does not belong there. As a supporter of Anthony Joshua, I have to say that he disappointed me, and he disappointed a lot of people. He did not live up to the expectations set before him. He didn't go out there and perform like the consensus #1 heavyweight champion at the weight. That in spite of everything he had done thus far, over 6 years in his professional career, unifying world titles and taking on top contenders, last night's performance was a very poor exhibit, a poor display of ring IQ. Ring IQ would dictate you don't give up your height to the shorter guy if you don't have to, especially if that shorter guy has quick counter punches and deceptive power. That Andy Ruiz may not look like an Adonis, he may not look like he could win the Arnold Classic, but rest assured, his physique and his ability to win a fight and hurt a guy Those are two very different things. You know, I heard the commentary leading up to the fight. I heard what people had to say about Andy Ruiz. And anybody who has actually seen him in action would know that he's more dangerous than his innocuous physique would lead you to believe. And you would think that an Olympic gold medalist who also happens to be a unified champion as a professional would take stock of that. Is it that Anthony Joshua looked past Andy Ruiz? Or is it just a byproduct of what was a poor game plan? Maybe Andy just has his number.
Maybe.
Maybe fighting on, foreign soil. Maybe fighting on foreign soil made Anthony Joshua feel out of his element, out of his own. It can be any variety of intangibles, but regardless of which one of those intangibles you want to go with, at the end of the day, Anthony Joshua made a mistake, and he paid for it, and he never quite recovered from it. That after that initial knockdown, he was on Queer Street from, every moment thereafter. Now, what needs to be understood is that all the credit has to go to Andy Ruiz, because Andy Ruiz stepped up where a lot of other guys chose to sit it out. Guys who got offered more money than Andy Ruiz, guys who have more of a profile, more of a reputation than Andy Ruiz, that were all these big bad wolves, decided that this fight wasn't important enough that they should take up this opportunity. Andy stepped up. Andy nutted the fuck up. And Andy got the job done. So no one else but Andy motherfucking Ruiz deserves the credit. I know there's a lot of talk right now. I see all the talk that's floating around right now. There's a lot of people that are acting as if it was Deontay Wilder, Tyson Fury that won this fight. But those guys were actually afforded this opportunity before Andy Ruiz, long before Andy Ruiz. And those guys chose to do what they chose. It wasn't important enough to them, whereas for Andy, it was of the utmost importance. I'll tell you, there's just so much ground to cover on this thing that I haven't even scratched the surface. There are so many implications, so many ways that this is going to reverberate throughout the heavyweight division and just boxing as a whole, because this was a monumental upset with monumental repercussions. Like, where does Anthony Joshua go from here? Does he decide to go into an immediate rematch? Does he exercise his rematch clause, or does he need a confidence-building fight first? Does he need a complete overhaul? Does he need a new trainer? What's he gonna do? Does he have the rematch? Does he win the rematch? If he doesn't, what happens with Andy Ruiz? There's so much ground to cover. But what resonates with me the most is how this services as a cautionary tale in regards to the evils and the consequences of complacency. That you may have a golden opportunity put in front of you, and if you don't strike while the iron is hot, someone else will, because someone else always does. In this instance, where guys like Ortiz, guys like Kalnaki, guys like Deontay Wilder had first dibs. They got this opportunity before Andy, okay? Andy didn't come into it until until everybody else passed it up. Where all these big bad wolves decided to pass on this opportunity for one reason or another, diva antics, call it what you will, but where those guys decided to pass on this opportunity, it was Andy that chose to capitalize on it. Thus, it is Andy and only Andy that deserves the credit, not them. Wilder didn't beat Anthony Joshua or Luis Ortiz. It was Andy Ruiz who stepped up when they stepped down.